The Sultan's Palace.
This house got a wicked story.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
Oh, all right. Oh,
What's your name? I'm Jerry.
cool. Nice to meet you.
Oh,
You
so-
got me on footage.
Nice
That
to meet
was
you.
up New Orleans.
Tell us about the Sultan's Palace.
Oh. All right, where do I start? Murder.
Yes, right.
Soldiers and everything. They had a party, and with people usually
Yeah.
see, people, live and jolly, whatever. Then it got quiet. So someone checked on, and all I know is that they had hands sticking out the top. This is where the usual tour guides
Yeah.
stop people.
Right, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
now where are y'all from again?
We're from the Panhandle of Florida.
We're not far. We're neighbors.
Yeah.
First time?
Oh no.
Oh no, we
My
come
sister
here a
lives in
lot.
Hammond.
I
Yeah,
was about to say, what took you so long?
yeah,
Didn't
yeah,
know about this story, so I was like, wow, show me.
yeah. But
Oh no, we come to.
we love a history.
We love the whole city.
Thank you so much for giving me a little commentary. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're a first-time viewer, I'm happy you found me. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, and click the notifications for new content. Again, welcome, and let's get into the story. The Sultan's Palace, officially known as the Gardet-Le Mansion, is a historical landmark located in the French Quarter on Dauphine Street. It was nicknamed the Sultan's Palace, and most likely will be forever referred to that moniker for the legendary tale behind it, where the bloodiest murder scene in New Orleans took place. According to legend, the Sultan, a Turkish man named Suleiman, and his entourage of 37 people, all from Turkey, were viciously butchered to death one stormy night shortly after the Civil War began. The American Civil War was the war fought between the Northern Union and Confederate South and the South's attempt to secede from the Union. The central cause of the war was the status of slavery, especially the expansion of slavery into territories acquired as a result of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and the Mexican-American War. So is the Sultan's story true or just a legend? The notorious story of the murders is not an official documented case, including if the Sultan and his people ever lived there. But with every legend comes some fact. Whether it's only half the truth, or nothing but the truth, or even a total fabrication, I'm gonna tell it anyway. In 1834, it is known and well documented that the Lalaurie Mansion, where the grisly treatment, brutal torture, and the horrific murder of slaves at the hands of Madame Delphine Lalaurie occurred. When one of the slaves, chained to the stove, started a fire in the home to stop this madwoman and expose her for who she really was, so it is quite possible that the Sultan story is true as well, only it was never an official documented case. Apparently, the murders that took place at the Sultan's Palace were said to have been so grisly that local newspapers refused to report the story, which is why it is considered a legend. Yet later, the story was written about in history books dating back to 1922. But during the mid-1800s, city officials most likely would have kept this story under wraps, considering that period in time, and to save and preserve the reputation of their city. Including Lepret, the owner and landlord of the mansion, who most likely wanted it kept on the down low, as he already recognized the Sultan as saving him from his economic distress and would have wanted to be able to continue making money from other tenants after the murders occurred. I mean, would you want to live there if you knew what took place before? Maybe that's not a fair question at this point. I haven't even gotten that far into the story yet to give you those juicy details, no pun intended. So hold that thought. The legend begins around the Civil War, which started in April of 1861. The mansion is located on the corner of Dauphine and Orleans Streets in the French Quarter and stands 3.5 stories tall. The Greek Revival architecture of the mansion was built in 1836 by Joseph Colon Gardet, a dentist who transplanted from Philadelphia and made his fortune in New Orleans. 3 years later, in 1839, Jean-Baptiste Lepret, one of the wealthiest men in New Orleans, who owned many plantations outside the city, bought the home from Gardet, basically as a home he could retreat to in the French Quarter. After he bought the mansion, he added the intricately decorated wrought iron railings to all the balconies that still adorn the building today. During the Civil War, like many people in New Orleans, Lepret lost most of his fortune, and to compensate for his financial losses, he moved out of the mansion and began planning to rent it out to tenants. Another documented fact about the mansion is that during the beginning of the Civil War, part of the captured flagstaff at Fort Sumter, sent by General P.G.T. Beauregard of the Confederate States of America, was presented to the Orleans Guards at this site on June 2, 1861. This event would have occurred shortly before the story of the Sultan's plight, as it is believed that he would have visited sometime after the beginning of the war and during the summer. June 2nd is still part of the spring season, and the Sultan could not have shown up until a little later for this story to be true. Plus, it has been said that he did not show up in New Orleans until sometime during the summer months. So he probably made his debut in the city closer to the end of June or the beginning of July. To begin the saga of the Sultan's palace, Lepret was approached by a man from Turkey claiming to be a sultan who went by the name of Suleiman and inquired about renting the home for the summer, and Lepret saw his opportunity to make some of his money back he lost during the war. The Sultan was a Turkish Muslim royal sovereign, which is a monarch or a king. In other words, he was considered a big deal, even in a foreign land. The Sultan moved in and had the mansion decorated up a bit before returning to Turkey to gather his people and belongings, to bring them back with him to New Orleans. Later, a ship from the foreign land arrived in the port of New Orleans, where about 37 people on board disembarked, including the Sultan's children, servants, a harem of women dressed in colorful garments, and the guards in military clothing carrying rifles. Then the Sultan himself walked off the ship last. Next came the furnishings: beds, vases, portraits, lavish artwork, and fine Persian rugs that impressed the locals at the sight of all these riches. When they left the port, located on the Mississippi River, they all marched themselves in a linear fashion right through Jackson Square, trekking north through the alleyways past the great church, the St. Louis Cathedral, and kept walking directly towards their destination and straight to the mansion on Dauphine Street, where they all piled in together to live with him, now known as the Sultan's Palace. They quickly began transforming the mansion into a fortress, hanging drapes over the windows. They chained and padlocked the doors, and only the guards were seen standing outside each day. Once they all moved in, no one ever saw them come out. Residents and neighbors could hear the parties in full swing every night, from the music played during the festivities and celebrations to the light giggling of women and heavy laughter of men, and at times, the sounds of pleasure. People in passing could smell the incense and opium that seeped through the windows every time they walked by. Part of this legend has claimed that if a pretty young woman walked by the mansion, the Sultan would have her kidnapped by his guards and added to his harem of women. Eventually, women stopped walking anywhere near the palace to avoid being captured. The festive activities at the palace went on for months, until the night of the tempestuous storm, when all were silenced by the horrific murders. A long time ago, people described severe weather as tempests, which is defined as severe storms with heavy rains and strong winds. And keep in mind, these were times long before radar systems and meteorologists, and before the word hurricane was even coined or addressed by names. So it's very possible this could have been some type of tropical system that the residents experienced that night. The storm was so bad that the residents in the French Quarter hunkered down in their homes, locking their doors and shutting their windows down tight to ride out the heavy wind and loud thunderous storm. During the storm, Someone took notice that another ship had sailed into the harbor, but by morning it was gone, and so was the storm. People awoke that morning to sunny blue skies and perfect weather conditions, and began to reopen their homes. Some decided to go for a stroll. The locals were just getting ready for another day when a neighbor walking by the mansion noticed that the guards were missing and that the doors were wide open, and for the first time since the arrival of the Sultan with his crew, he eerily heard complete and total dead silence. But what really caught his attention was the blood flowing down the front steps of the palace, so he immediately ran to the police station and alerted the authorities. When the police arrived, they found a horrific scene. Bodies were hacked to pieces with body parts and severed heads lying all around the mansion. Instead of the smells of incense and opium, the smell of blood permeated in the air throughout the home. Blood was everywhere, splattered all over the walls, the floors, the drapes, and the furniture. It was a complete and total bloody massacre. It was so gruesome that several policemen became sick and had to run outside to vomit. A total of 37 people, including Suleiman's children, were found murdered. The last person to be found was the Sultan himself. When the police walked out into the courtyard, they saw hands sticking through the muddy ground. It was assumed that he was buried alive and choked to death on the muddy water while trying to claw himself out of his grave during the stormy night. In addition to these evil acts, the killers left something eerie, a note attached to the partially buried hand that read, "This is what happens to traitors." It would later be discovered that there was a twist to this story. After the brutal slaughter, the people of New Orleans found out that Suleiman was not the real Sultan, that he was only the brother of the actual Sultan, and that he moved to New Orleans later with the stolen wealth he took from his brother when he left Turkey, so he could hide out and live large while remaining at large. It also makes sense why he never left the palace and made sure his guards protected the mansion. Apparently, Suleiman had been stripped from his royal title and banished from Turkey by his brother for stealing one of his brother's wives, his wealth, and his guards, most likely the same crew and riches he brought with him to New Orleans. In retaliation, it is believed his infuriated brother was behind the grisly murders and was determined to send a message. I am thinking he made Suleiman watch as everyone was tortured and killed, then buried alive to suffer the cruelest of deaths and to pay the ultimate price. Word could have easily been relayed to his brother of his whereabouts. When he returned to Turkey to bring back his large entourage and riches to hide out in New Orleans, it could have been that his plans were found out by someone who eventually snitched, causing his brother and an army of assassins to travel abroad and hunt him down in the city. When you think about it further, it begins to make even more sense about why Suleiman was in New Orleans by himself in the beginning, the same time when he met Lepret to inquire about renting the mansion, like he was casing the joint beforehand, trying it before buying it, then choosing to transplant himself along with his entourage, furnishings, and riches. Had he chosen to stay by himself and start a new life, since he was kicked out of his homeland, he probably never would have been murdered, but royalty was in his blood, and greediness was part of his nature. There was no way he was going to live like a pauper, without his riches and amenities. He certainly would have never been able to afford to live in the mansion without them. What the locals believed was that at some point during the storm, the ship that was spotted in the harbor that night must have been that of hired assassins, most likely hired by his brother, the real Sultan, and then proceeded to have the people slaughtered, not only as an act of revenge, but to inspire a message of treachery. The slaughter was clearly meant to be set as an example to others of what not to do, or else this can happen to you too. Whomever was responsible for these unsolved murders were most likely the people aboard the ship, hired by his brother to slaughter 37 people, including the man who claimed to be the Sultan, forever turning this tale into the most notorious, legendary, and bloodiest massacre in New Orleans history that may or may not have happened. Later, as time moved on, people began to claim the mansion was haunted, and the tale spread like wildfire. Residents who have lived there said they have heard disembodied voices of screaming and have seen ghostly apparitions, including the Sultan himself. Others have claimed they've seen the spirit of a Confederate soldier. Even today, people have claimed when walking by the mansion that sometimes they hear the chimes of bells and can smell incense coming from the windows. People who lived at the mansion during modern times have told similar stories, and that sometimes their belongings would be misplaced or go missing, while others have reported seeing ghostly figures standing by windows, gazing towards the outside world, observing people walking along the streets. In 1922, a book written by Helen Pitkin Schertz called Legends of Louisiana conveys the legends surrounding the Sultan's palace and includes the stories of the hauntings that were later reported by New Orleans residents. LaPrette, who rented to the Sultan around 1861 and afterwards to other residents, managed to hold on to ownership of the mansion until he lost it to foreclosure in 1878. Sometime during the late 1800s, a woman was on the top balcony of the mansion when she fell to her death below. Some believe she was pushed by an unseen force, an unruly phantom, an extremely unkind ghost. She is another apparition people claim that inhabits and haunts the mansion. Hopefully, if it is her, that it's only her residual imprint and that her true spirit is at rest and in a better place, which is how I feel for any place that claims it's been haunted, especially that long. As years passed by, it was occupied for many different uses and business, until it sat empty for about 30 years without any upkeep or maintenance, basically just left to rot. But in 1979, some investors bought and restored it, then turned the mansion into a series of apartments and condos. Getting back to the Sultan legend of the massacre, here are my thoughts. First, any story is possible, especially when that story has been told and explained since the time it supposedly happened, around the mid-1800s. So, depending on what year this happened during the Civil War, which legend states it happened close to the start of the war, which began in the spring of 1861, this story, or legend, is at least 160 years old. With all the details involved in this story and the accounts of the locals from that time period, I would have to say I am more of a believer. It makes sense to me that at least some of the events in the story are convincingly believable. The one detail in this legend I feel is most likely false, and I am playing armchair detective, mind you, but since they arrived with around 37 people, supposedly the exact number found slaughtered, the rumor that Suleiman was kidnapping young women from the streets and holding them prisoner as new additions to his harem would have made the death toll much higher, because no one present in the palace survived the massacre. This part of the story seems to be sketchy, probably a rumor started way back by a local with a busybody personality type, and most likely not true. However, because of the secrecy in how the people at the palace lived, and the fact they did not interact with the locals, I can understand how rumors might have been conjured up. People always gossip when they don't understand something, which usually ends up as crazy assumptions and false theories that people start to believe that spread like a virus. But for the most part, I believe the story could be true and not just a legend. If the story is false, then I would say someone back then was one heck of a storyteller, a story so riveting and believable that it's been written about and is still being told by the locals today, passed down through generations and delivered in compelling and unchanging events for well over a century. What do you believe? Tell me what you think about the legend of the Sultan's palace by commenting below. We are approaching the port of New Orleans, which that is the Mississippi River, the mighty Mississippi. This is where the Sultan and his entourage showed up in a ship from Turkey to rent what we know today as the Sultan's Palace. We wanted to take the trek and show you the journey from the port up here all the way to the Sultan's Palace, where they stayed until the legend of the murder took place port in New Orleans. And right here is where their vessel pulled up, and an entourage of men, women, children, men with in guard uniforms with bayonets. So now we're going to turn back. You see the church. That is Jackson's.
Escaping from his brother, whom he had robbed.
Right. Hello. Hello, buddy.
It's the worst of that.
So what we're about to do is walk up into Jackson Square, because that's what they do. They walk right in front. Now, if this happened during the Civil War, when LaPrete came under economic hardships,
This many people would not have been here.
the Sultan renting his house, which becomes known as the Sultan's Palace, saved him. It was like a relief. So at the time, they would have walked right through here in front of the statue. They would have walked right through here, passing the statue of Andrew Jackson that was put up because of the battle of the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, part of the War of 1812 war. So they would have walked through here, past the church. The building to the left is the Cabildo, where the Louisiana Purchase was signed. It's supposed to have a really nice museum in there. We just haven't been in it yet, but we plan to eventually. It is very hot. You want to go play in the water fountain?
Green water.
I know. The one time you wish it would actually just start raining.
Alright, go to the right.
I am.
I'll take a picture.
We're got to go the ride anyway.
Why?
Walking through in front of the church to the alleyway where they would have walked down, because it's basically a straight shot from here. This is the alleyway on the east end of the church.
Snap.
Now when we get to the end, we're gonna go up, we're gonna go left. That street is Royal that we're coming upon, and we're gonna take a left. Then we're gonna take a right onto Orleans, and the Sultan's Palace is actually the address is Dauphine, but it's on the corner of Dauphine and Orleans Street. So we're approaching Royal, just like they would have. There just wouldn't have been all these cars here at the time. There would have been horse and carriages. We're just gonna go catty corner right over here to Orleans. This is nowhere on Orleans, or I'm sorry, Orleans Street. Speaking of horses and carriages, these would be the things they would tie their horses to, just like a parking spot, like that car is parked. Well, you would park here with your horse and carriage. And there's more up here. This is Bourbon Street. They would have crossed Bourbon Street. So right ahead, with these balconies here above, is the Sultan's Palace. And I will come around and get a front view. So you got Dauphine Street ahead. This is the Sultan's Palace. close up. Now if you look straight behind, there's the church. And back up the walkway. We ended up having to go get a drink because it's so hot here. Okay, so now we are at the corner of Orleans and Dauphin, and this is the Sultan's Palace. When the Sultan and his crew first moved into the palace, the first thing they did was they shut all the shutters to the windows. They locked the doors. They stayed inside, never coming out. They partied in there. People said they could hear music coming from this house that lived around here. Like I said, they could smell opium. What happened was there was a storm one night, and everybody that lived around here at the time locked in for the night. It was a really bad storm, like maybe a hurricane type, or it could have been a hurricane. They didn't call them hurricanes back there, but if it was a really bad storm, they called them tempests. And so what they did was, like I said, they locked themselves in for the night. The next morning, when the storm cleared, a man was the legend goes, a man was walking by, and these steps right here, he said that blood was trickling through the doorway and trickling all the way down the steps.
I heard it was flowing.
Or flowing, yes, that's probably a better word. But it was a lot of blood. A lot of blood flowing that's how they realized something bad had happened. And not only that, it was the first time in months that this place was completely silent. So the man discovering the blood alerted authorities. The police came. When they opened the door to a grisly scene of body parts and blood all over the place, and dismembered people, heads, arms, legs. When they went to look for the Sultan, they could not find him. They eventually did go to the courtyard, and they found like a mound of mud with a hand sticking up through it. So what they think is that whoever killed them, and I'll get to that part too, was that they buried him alive, and he was trying to claw his way out, but he suffocated under that mound of mud and dirt and water. And now who they think, the theory, of course, like I said again, now this is legend because they said that, they didn't publish it in the papers at the time because nobody had ever heard of any kind of massacre like this happening. It was never solved. It's an unsolved murder. And I imagine right behind these walls right here would be the courtyard. It's a cute puppy. Oh, hello, baby. So, up in there, if this is a true story, that's where the Sultan would have been found, in the courtyard, with his hand sticking through the mud. This is also the house that I did a video about the Axeman, when the person released that photo on Creepypasta saying that they think they had caught the Axeman at the last victim. Mike, I can't remember his name, but he was an Italian. Anyway, his last victim was not killed here. No victim was killed in the French Quarter. He was killed on Scott and Eulola streets. So that was not the Axeman, and I made a video about that in my Axeman, and I'll put a link at the end for that. So, but pretty much, I'll just read you this sign here. When New Orleans was the capital of the Spanish province of Louisiana, 1762 through 1803. And I'll go across the street one more time and get a shot of it. Right They said there's the church. That's where they walked up the street, went inside, and never came back out until, well, they never came back out. If the legend's true, they never came back out because they were dead. And there's another story, and I'll have to look that up, but apparently a woman was walking around on top of that building and either fell off or was pushed off. Not real sure. I'm just here covering the Sultan and what is known, it became known as the Sultan's Palace, but it was owned by III. For new content and breaking news stories, please be sure to click the notifications to follow along and be notified when updates are available. Don't forget to like, comment, and please feel free to share. You can also join my Facebook group for True Crime and History Time and follow me on TikTok and Instagram. My usernames for those platforms are @JeriScarborough Official. And as always, thank you for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel.